Trump does have a surprisingly thin skin. He's rough in his jokes. He even made a joke about getting wood during his presidential debate with Joe Biden. He is certainly not polite. He knows how to behave, but he frequently chooses not to. Trump kisses up and kicks down. He gets reactive, but he won't quit. He's not an intellectual. When someone pathologically narcissistic, deep in the blackness of his heart. Trump made a name for himself in the difficult business of construction, where, particularly in cities such as New York and Chicago, all manner of corruption and trouble had to be managed. Anyone who's ever undertaken a renovation of any magnitude knows how badly such things can spiral out of control without diligent devotion of time and attention. He managed, while doing so, to make himself quite famous, another feat that is by no means as simple as those who have never done it might imagine. So maybe there was something to him on the diligence, attention, and negotiation front that belied his mere success as a celebrity. After that, of course, he was co-producer and host of the reality shows The Apprentice and The Celebrity Apprentice. These were highly successful, and for a long time, particularly by legacy media TV standards. He's also the author of 19 books, collaborating with various ghostwriters, and has been involved in a true variety of other business enterprises. This history of entrepreneurial activity, combined with his successful bids for attention, speaks to two of President Trump's cardinal personality features. He is extremely extroverted, that is, both assertive and enthusiastic, although more particularly the former rather than the latter, and also at least relatively high in trait openness, which is the single best predictor of entrepreneurial/creative activity and prowess after general intelligence. This makes him high in the personality meta trait of plasticity, which is characterized primarily by the capacity to change, grow, and transform. Something quite evident in the case of Trump, who is a very dynamic individual indeed, particularly given his age. Many people have been set in concrete with regard to their essential being by the time they're 30, not Trump. He reinvents himself constantly and with a high degree of continual success. That can happen by chance once, perhaps twice, but if it is sustained across many decades, there is something substantive and real at work. I also followed the Donald with great amusement on Twitter during his presidential run and afterward. The man has a devastating and underappreciated, at least by the legacy leaders of opinion, sense of humor, although it is also somewhat ruthless. I believe that deeper consideration of this proclivity for the viciously funny is also useful in shedding more general light on Trump's admittedly complex personality. First, we should fairly note that dictatorial types, a category which his enemies insist he falls into, are generally not known for their sense of humor. People were imprisoned in the Stalinist Soviet Union for being the first to stop applauding after a speech by the great leader. Criticism was absolutely out of the question and certainly not forthcoming from the top. I've also never encountered a compendium of the witty and amusing things said by Adolf Hitler or Fidel Castro or Chairman Mao. Trump does have a surprisingly thin skin in some settings, but he can take a joke as well as tell one. He was roasted on Comedy Central in 2011, bandied back and forth self-deprecatingly several times with David Letterman. He even made a joke about getting wood during his presidential debate with Joe Biden. He's rough in his jokes, but no more, say, than Bill Burr. Understanding and appreciating this helps us in comprehending one of Trump's more remarkable features, his serious attractiveness to the working class. This is something particularly made evident in his ability to easily banter with soldiers and policemen, a rare trait among politicians, often made nervous by the necessity of interacting with real people with dangerous and difficult jobs. Let us not forget, as well, that the humor characteristic of working class men and women also tends toward the rough more deeply. This capacity to relate, the variability that is so often derided as an appeal to a hypothetically dangerous populism, speaks to me of the paradoxical presence in Trump's character of a substantive degree of agreeableness, the personality trait most associated with empathy for other people, and one that seriously mitigates against the more pathological elements of the narcissism that can be associated with extreme extroversion. How can this be, given his rough and sometimes even bullying humor? Well, agreeableness subdivides into the aspects of politeness and compassion. Although they tend to co-vary, else would not unite to produce the trait, people can somewhat rarely be high in one and low in the other. This makes them somewhat harder persons to understand, but is something that is nonetheless possible. I believe that Donald J. is one of those people. He is certainly not polite. He knows how to behave, so is not merely unsocialized or accidentally gauche, but he frequently chooses not to. This is part of what makes him so funny. The aforementioned Bill Burr is not polite. Louis C.K. is not polite. Many comical people will say anything that comes into their mind, no matter what, if it is either true or funny or optimally both. Trump definitely falls into this camp. It is clear from the personality and psychopathology literature that people tilt towards narcissism when they are extroverted and disagreeable. Trump is indisputably extroverted and extremely so. He's also definitely low in politeness, but he simply would not be able to make contact with the so-called ordinary people that love him if he did not care deep in the blackness of his heart. I have a suspicion that his very impoliteness is at least in part a mask worn to shield him from the pain that such caring can produce. This would make Trump a man whose gruffness is there to shield himself from the public exposure of his tender heart. There are many men who are like that. Now, I don't know Trump, but I know many people who do. All of them have spoken to me of his hospitable nature in private and of his proclivity to go out of his way for the people around him. This group of witnesses to his character includes people who are seriously not aligned with him politically, by the way. It is also by no means obvious that Trump kisses up and kicks down. That tendency is a very damning sign indeed, particularly in someone who has genuine power and is simply not reported of Trump. This is something that appears to stand in marked comparison to Kamala Harris, who is notoriously unpopular among her staff, current and former, and for precisely that reason. Two personality traits remain to assess with regard to the former president: that of neuroticism, the tendency to experience negative emotion, and conscientiousness, the tendency to work hard and diligently and to formulate and keep verbal contracts. Neuroticism subdivides into withdrawal, a depression-like proclivity to shrink, avoid, and freeze in the face of challenge, and volatility, a tendency towards what can be an aggressive touchiness. Trump appears to me to be someone who is very difficult to stop. Thus, my suspicion is that he is very low in withdrawal. What may perhaps add to the paradox of his personality, however, is a higher level of volatility. People can and do get under his skin, as Kamala Harris did so effectively. He gets reactive, but he won't quit, and he can handle high levels of pressure on a continual basis. His spontaneous response to being nearly assassinated provided clear and stellar evidence of that. What about conscientiousness? Trump famously does not drink or use recreational drugs, so he prioritizes his sobriety and alertness over the transient pleasures of substance use. I also cannot see how he could juggle all the activities that he has been involved in, even the ghostwriting aided production of 19 books, not a trivial accomplishment, to say the least of all his other businesses and projects, without a true work ethic. He's up at 5:30 a.m., a sign of the so-called morningness, the preference for early rather than late hours, which is associated temperamentally with both agreeableness and conscientiousness. Night owls tend as well to be more neurotic and to display more symptoms of personality disorder. Trump seems to be active and working, as well as gathering information about the state of things from TV, until about midnight each day. That's a long day of movement. He has a reputation for being a veritable whirlwind of activity in general, a description I find credible given his strenuous campaign schedule, high openness and extroversion, and early morning preference, all despite his relatively advanced age. On the openness side, I suspect Trump is more interested in ideas than aesthetics. That is two aspects into which openness differentiates. He's not an intellectual, nor an artist, so I wouldn't place him in the upper echelons of the distribution of this trait. But no one average or below devotes any attention, for example, to writing books, and the number of books the typical person has written is 0. The diversity of his career is another testament to his trait openness. Trump is clearly a serial entrepreneur type. Why does Trump set so many people on edge? To recapitulate, he is exceptionally extroverted, particularly with regard to the aspect of assertiveness. He's also low in politeness. Now that combination has some overlap with narcissism, not surprising in a figure who has been in the spotlight and strived to be for so many years. However, he is genuinely compassionate, quite surprisingly so, and appears on the basis of his behavior to be relatively or perhaps even markedly conscientious. The presence of those aspects and traits mitigates against what could otherwise be the dangers associated with narcissism. The typical narcissist, particularly the more malignant, sadistic, Machiavellian types, have absolutely no qualms about sacrificing others to their imperial ambitions. They may well regard it as a great honor for others to die in service of their own glorification. Trump, by marked contrast, embroiled the U.S., the most powerful military force the world has ever seen, in precisely 0 wars. Furthermore, he negotiated the Abraham Accords, the 9 miraculous peace agreements that have built around Israel a cohort of, if not exactly Arab allies, at least not outright enemies. In a just world, Trump and his previous team of diplomats should have been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for this accomplishment, which was deemed impossible by the experts decade after decade of the State Department. Let us reiterate in relation to our analysis. We understand his personality, arguably, and may even have some remaining qualms about it. However, Donald J. Trump has already been president, and his tenure was marked by an absolute lack of cataclysmic occurrences. We can therefore reliably rest assured on that front. It might also be noted here that his impolite assertiveness and proclivity not to withdraw in fear or dismay might be a real strength when dealing with dictators, particularly in combination with his openness, which makes him able to think outside the box and to bring to the negotiating table the advantage of unpredictability. Furthermore, Trump's time as president was also marked by a not inconsiderable domestic economic record, at least decent economic performance, and peace. The fact of these twin facts has put many of the various concerns I once had about Trump's personality to rest, as has my now more sophisticated appreciation for his particularized and unique combination of traits. The Republican candidate has now attracted a truly remarkable, surprising, and stellar group of compatriots around him, all highly accomplished and formidable figures, each with their own marked eccentricities. This is also not something that is likely to occur when someone pathologically narcissistic is running the show. One final important fact should be noted pertaining to the former president. The Donald is evidently willing to share the spotlight with Musk and, apparently, to listen to what the eccentric but stunningly capable and clearly genius-level intellect former South African has to say. A cynic might opine that the former president is merely capitalizing on the additional attention his dalliance with Musk might bring him. I would object, however, as a clinician on twin grounds. First, if Trump truly were narcissistic, Musk might be the last person with whom he would dally. The latter, Musk, rivals or exceeds him in fame and power, and definitely surpasses him in sheer genius. That is not a situation that a truly self-centered and power-mad dictator in waiting is likely to appreciate. Second, with regard to garnering attention, the genuine narcissist is someone unlikely to believe that anyone else is likely to bring anything of value to the table, not already in display in consequence of their own boundless and singular specialness.